I'm investigative journalist Molly Barrows. For years, I've covered the stories that made headlines in Northwest Florida and all along the Gulf Coast. Murders, missing persons, and mysteries of all kinds. These cases are far from over for many victims because the full story has yet to surface. Join me for Gulf Coast Confidential, where I dive into the saltier side of the South and expose the lies, greed, and corruption that often weighs down the truth. It's time to turn the tide and get a shot at justice. Hey y'all, I'm Molly Barrows, and welcome to our first live deep dive conversation here on Gulf Coast Confidential. In honor of Valentine's Day, we have a couple of very special guests. Pam Hill, of course, as always, is our victims advocate and pharmacist. She has lots of experience with advocating for victims. She's sadly experienced violent crime in her own family. And as you know, if you follow the podcast regularly, we dive into a lot of crazy cases. And here to help us unpack some of these crazy cases is Sean Abbott, licensed clinical social worker. Thank you so much for coming on, Sean.
Sure. Glad
we
to
sort
be
of dragged him on kicking and screaming, y'all. So his expertise is in mental health and counseling and helping people, especially with addiction issues. And that comes into play in a lot of the cases that we cover, doesn't it?
It definitely does. We've got folks doing all kind of crazy stuff. Paramours, lovers, right here on Galentine's Day. We've got our own Galentine, Sean.
I know. We get to have a male perspective
Right.
as well, which is nice on some of these things. So we're calling this segment Effed Up Love, because these cases that we're talking about, it's like worst case scenario. You know, we all know people in our lives. Certainly I've experienced it myself. You know, things don't work out, but nobody's died,
Right.
thankfully. You know, but in a lot of the cases that we cover, people die.
Yes,
and they die for different reasons. And, you know, everything from just bad love triangles where people may die not intentionally or they do die intentionally. But really what it boils down to, I think in a lot of these cases, it's toxic love, you know, or toxic relationships. And we've got a lot of local cases that we're going to touch on. If you followed plastic surgeon, you know, Dr. Ben Brown, he is facing negligent manslaughter charges for the death of his wife, Hillary Brown. Her own father said they had something of a toxic relationship as far as their personal relationship before that terrible tragedy happened. And then Judy Buenoano, Pensacola's own serial killer. She was responsible for the deaths of her lovers as well as her son, and was sadly, you know, buried those folks and then was put to death in the state of Florida. First woman put to death in decades for her crimes. And so there's a lot of cases that I think, you know, are extreme examples of toxic relationships. So before we dive into some of the details of these cases that we've touched on before, Sean, what exactly would you describe a toxic relationship as?
Ooh, goodness. Okay. Well, this is, you know, I'm gonna maintain this my whatever definition I do end up coming up with is limited to this podcast, and I'm sure may hear from plenty of people who've written, you know, literature and books and stuff on toxic relationships. But if I were to start from scratch and start thinking about it to describe it, I would say it's two or maybe one or more people these days coming together, and one has a need that is beyond the other person's real genuine ability to provide, and that need and these drives really, as we've all heard and heard about, really are initiated and originate in childhood. You know, a lot of us are seeking to fulfill things that didn't happen early on.
Right.
And that goes on unconsciously much of the time, and so the person, just desperate for whether it's attention or whatever, is seeking this, and the other person may be just taken aback by, I don't know what this, you know, at first it was nice and now it's like beyond what I can do or even know about. So it's just, you know, everything's on a continuum. It just depends on, and goodness knows that when I heard about the topic, I was like, golly, you know, there are toxic relationships that go on for 40 years and they're still united, you know. So
Some people probably don't even know they're in them. I would
Well,
imagine.
yeah, it's I can liken it to addiction, really, or different severities of mental illnesses. It's all a continuum, and when is it a problem? Well, it's a problem when we start noticing it's a problem, and when people start pointing fingers and just more and more unmanageability comes about, that's when it's a problem.
Because of these unreasonable expectations. It's one thing to have like the normal, I guess, rub, if you will, between personalities or people just being in a relationship together. Healthy's hard enough, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. So unhealthy. If you find that you're, I would say physically being injured, that's an obvious sign. But sometimes I feel like, and maybe I'm even speaking from personal experience, but like if you're used to, if you don't have expectations of it being perhaps better, or, you don't know what good looks like, if you will.
Absolutely. And in my current practice, what I find day in and day out is most of us lack a real ability to communicate our needs and wants assertively, and so these things come out, backhandedly or sideways. We really just don't communicate and keep up with communication well. That's what I find day in, day out. People don't understand one another. We want to be understood, but often don't take the time to understand, and so that's the impasse that I see a lot.
Yes, it's interesting. We've got a local murder case that Bree Kuhn was just convicted not too long ago for killing her husband, shot him to death. And it's one that Pam followed pretty closely, and we did an episode on it. Basically, bossy Bree Kuhn is she seemed to be a person that wanted to wear the pants in the family. And by all accounts, including her deceased husband's friends and family, he was kind, he was generous, he was a giver. Even to the last day of his life, she had repeatedly called police, tried to get him kicked out of the house. And by their accounts, he'd done nothing for them to take him away. She was accusing him of domestic violence. That hadn't happened. But she ended up, shooting him essentially in the back to death after locking him in the garage. And it almost seems like in a lot of these cases, including hers, she was convicted, but these people build it up in their own minds where they're justified, that what they want, it may seem extreme to us to end someone's life, and it is extreme. It should seem that way, But to them, I feel like in so many of these cases, it just seems like, you owe me this. I deserve to be able to take your life. And that's shocking to me that you can't, I don't know, self-reflect enough to see, hey, murdering the father of my child may not be the best option.
Right.
When he's not even attacking me.
Right. While he's on the phone with 911.
Right,
And
right.
shoots him in the back. And with the police coming out 3 times, and every time, sometimes we don't really have to read someone's mind or know what they want, but it certainly helps if we communicate better. But when you've got someone taking your computer and throwing it over there in the dishwasher and running it through a couple of times and won't turn the TV down, and you've asked them to turn it down, and the next morning they call the police on you 3 times throughout the day, this person is not agreeable. This is probably not a good relationship to be in at this very moment. But this Colin, Bree's husband, he did everything right. He walked away. He didn't escalate it. He stayed calm. But there was nothing that this lady was going to take, because she wanted to even run the policeman like she was married to them.
Yes.
So this is what's going to happen. You can almost look at something and see it's formulaic. This is not normal.
Right. And speaking of not normal, we also had Judy Buenaño. Of course, she killed her first husband, not long after he got out of the military. Then she moved on to a boyfriend. He also died of suspicious circumstances. Later convicted of killing her son, drowning him. So, it's a pattern in hindsight, but certainly to the men in her life, be it lovers or relatives, they probably didn't see that. Or if they did, they were blinded by, I think in her case, she used sex as a weapon, if you will, and was ultra feminine in that way, and would seek out men with money, but then pulled the very ultra feminine, because she was actually a very tall woman, statuesque, if you will. So she played up all the feminine things, like the nails, the perfume, like a cloud of perfume, the way everybody talked about it.
You could smell her coming.
Right. So I do wonder about, it kind of hurts my heart for people when their expectations are such like, oh gosh, she's paying attention to me and she looks lovely and she smells so nice. And for them, that's enough. And in her mind, she was thinking, gosh, it's just a matter of time before I get them into my web and I'm able to take their money and set it up to where they die. And, no one knows why. And I do wonder if at any time these folks had like an inkling in the back of their mind, like, hey, something's not right. I wonder if, because patterns, like I said, are easy to see in hindsight, but maybe not, in the moment.
Right.
So what are some signs that perhaps somebody is like in a relationship that could be a problem, that are red flags? It's a red flag when you're dead.
Yeah.
Say.
Biggest one.
Right, I know.
Are you asking me or Pam?
Well, I guess either one. Yeah, either one. Now, Pam would know as well, I think. Yeah.
I might know, but I'm single as a Pringle. So that's why I know everything.
Yeah, I guess what can draw people into toxic relationships. And for those folks, those guys, they probably didn't even realize they were getting drawn into one. Now, the guy she tried to blow up, I think it did dawn on him when it didn't work. And she had been giving him, prior to him, trying to be blown up, she'd been giving him poison pills.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was thinking a little earlier. I had a lot of bright ideas and things to discuss prior to part of this.
But the lights come
podcast.
on, my mind goes blank. I know.
Yeah. And this is one of them. No, not really. But
Ready?
I was thinking that love is a drug. Love
Yeah.
is and it depends on in our individual concept of what love is and all that. But I think a lot of this is driven early on by just infatuation. We're in love with the idea of what this is looking like and what it could be.
And the physical reaction, like you said, the oxytocin, I guess it is, that your body releases. It feels good to feel that way.
Yeah, and the endorphins that get going, and then roles that we've defined. A giggly little girl over here because this football player comes by, and I feel more giggly, and he seems strong, and all this kind of stuff. That never goes away. That just keeps on going till you're 85, I guess. Because that's a natural thing back and forth. It's how we feel, and we all love being in love, like he was saying. And it can be a drug. Who wants to go around feeling bad?
Right. But you're right. And, your expertise is in addiction to a certain extent. And I think you're right. Some people can turn to relationships as a way to cope, as a coping mechanism.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think in Bree's case here that she had just lost her plumb line there, and she was going to win at all cost. Now, when love and infatuation and dating and all this kind of stuff turns into this win at all cost, does a person realize that they're becoming a person or something that is not necessarily good?
Again, I'm going to default to this stuff that started way early on. These drives, these needs, these wants, these desires are coming from early on, from age 1 through 5.
Oh, wow.
And we're trying to fill a hole that just wasn't met back then. That's kind of a broad statement. It's also dependent on the person's childhood and exposure or lack of exposure to love. That we maladapt, right?
Oh, that's a great description.
So that's what's going on with sociopathy in general. It's a maladaptation to how to survive, to how to get by. I didn't get it through two loving parents or some kind of loving upbringing, nurturing kind of guidance and direction and all this. I had it through neglect, or I got it through just direct abuse and just verbal beatdowns and just horrific stuff that we're familiar with that goes on.
So you go back to what you know.
So you go back to what you know, you put your guard up, and get through as best you can. And sometimes people find themselves in very desperate situations, to the point of wearing diapers cross country.
Right.
Oh my gosh, these love
To fulfill a
triangles.
need.
Yeah. We were talking about that. That's a good segue. That's another case that we covered here on Gulf Coast Confidential, the diaper wearing astronaut. For those of y'all that don't remember Lisa Nowak, and she was the astronaut. I mean, it's hard to become an astronaut, and
it is.
I mean, I'd be pretty like, hey.
Yeah.
I'm a badass, you know, pardon my French,
I'm
but
not
you
gonna
know,
waste
I'm
my
not going to
career.
slap on Depends and drive clear across the country for somebody. But her boyfriend was an astronaut as well. He had broken up with her for another woman, and she was married, but there was something about that relationship. She just couldn't let it go. And I'm sure if you were to talk to her now, she would say this is something I imagine she wished she hadn't done. I mean, it cost her a lot. You know, and who would ever think that your mistake would end up on national television too?
Right.
It's one thing to be having an affair and then maybe get carried away, and then the next thing you know, you've committed a alleged crime that now they want to slap your face all over the country, and it's bad enough that you've made this mistake, but now it's under the microscope for the whole wide world to see. But to a certain extent, I guess people can relate to relationships going wrong. They can relate to bad decisions, but carrying it that far is the extreme, and I guess that's what makes us all look twice.
Right. Well, she's another one that was going to win at all costs because I imagine when you, like since 1959, that's the year I was born, 65 years ago, there have only been 360 astronauts, and only 75 of those have been women. So you are in, quote unquote, a badass club.
Right.
So you're walking around, everybody cannot be an astronaut. That's pretty obvious. But she was going to win at all cost. And I call the love triangles the old freaky sneaky. The old freaky sneaky don't work.
And it never gets old, apparently. We can talk about love triangle
Right,
crazy
definitely.
cases forever.
And jealousy. She was
Yeah.
like, I'm not having that woman outdo me. Don't you understand? I'm an astronaut.
Right. Because it's not really about love for the other person. It's about, like you said, getting that need met, I guess, within themselves.
Yeah, just thinking about those behaviors, and I'm not, as I warned you guys earlier, I'm pretty unplugged with regard to the society's daily goings on, but
That's probably a good thing.
But I do remember that, and just that behavior reminds me. If this is allowed here, I could educated guess as to what may have been going on with that, just because I have an idea.
Absolutely.
It does. It doesn't not sound like. Here's a double negative for you, Molly.
I know my brain is like smoke's going to come out of my ears.
And I do want to tread lightly here because what I'm about to talk about is way overused, and where I'm going with this is bipolar disorder.
Interesting, yeah.
And
Very common.
Well, it's not all that common.
Okay.
It's and what I'm specifically mean is bipolar 1 disorder.
Okay.
And that's it's generally the emphasis is in the mania, hypermania even. Bordering on delusions when it really gets going. Serious impulsivity, can get in big trouble with gambling. You name it. I had a very sweet older woman, probably 15 years ago, in front of me, who could not stop cooking for her cul-de-sac.
Oh, wow.
So
I wish she were my neighbor.
So 48 hours, 72 hours in the kitchen, and she's walking stuff down the road and dropping it off in the front doorway. These people don't want the food.
Oh, wow.
But she's just on a roll with this is somehow needed.
Wow.
And why bipolar 1 disorder also comes to mind is some very successful, high achieving people have bipolar 1 disorder.
That's interesting.
It's just a matter of fact. Again, I'm not trying to go in any direction with it. It's just a matter of fact that high achievers, some folks with bipolar just can get on a track and achieve. Finding a balance for of great duration can be challenging, but it certainly has happened. Certainly happens.
Well, that's
so that's what comes to mind with that behavior.
Yes.
Is high achiever. It got bizarre.
It did.
And
It really did.
Great way to put it.
yeah,
Yes.
and that's not unlike some of the symptoms of bipolar 1.
That's interesting. Yeah. And I think I assumed it was common, and I believe you, but I think I assumed it was common just because I heard the term so much, almost like we hear sociopath anymore or narcissist.
It's used a lot. Kids use it a lot. Adults use it a lot. it's not applying as much as I think it's being used.
Okay.
Yeah, it takes a lot to meet that criteria, not just being moody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and it seems like too, and I'm switching gears here, but aside from the ones that are hyper focused on getting what they want at all costs, like you said, almost in a manic state, there's also, I think, this energy that goes into these love triangle relationships too. That you have folks that are just bound and determined at all costs just to get their way. And I'm thinking almost of the mistresses, the third person that comes into the already established relationship, that, the pig, the pastor, and the music
Right,
director
yeah.
out of Birmingham. This is a
Yeah.
story that Pam can fill us in on.
Wait, is that a kid's book? What? What is it?
It's awkward.
The pigs?
The pig, the pastor, and the music director.
Right.
Based on a true story.
Okay.
From where I'm from.
And again, not a kid's book.
No, not a kid's book. I mean, we'd have to really clean it up for it to be a kid's book. But yeah, this is what you were asking about Milo sweet tea earlier, which I have behind me. Like, that's where it came from. That was one of the,
Okay.
Clues, when the
yeah.
clues in there.
So this
We got-
music director started an affair with the pastor for a church.
Okay.
And they went to the Piggly Wiggly was kind of their alibi
Okay.
that night. And
Okay.
so anyhow, you can fill in the
Yeah.
rest of the
It's
story.
a love triangle in Birmingham, Alabama, up there in a
Okay.
little town called
Okay.
Morris.
Okay.
It's outside. And we have Milo's sweet tea all over the universe. But in Birmingham and Alabama, we have Milo's hamburgers places. Okay?
Okay.
And their fries are so delish, and you want to eat them while they're hot.
Right.
Well, what had happened was the couple that was married, Mike and Cindy, they had stopped on their way home after church to go home, and she decides that with their Milos, and she decides, well, I need to run to the Piggly Wiggly and get you some sandwich meat for your lunch tomorrow and some orange juice, when they already have that in the refrigerator. So anyway, the way one of the detectives came in had found out that the fries were sitting there and they were cold, and the detective said nobody would leave Milo's fries cold right there. So she's the one that shot him in the back of the head. And if that
Yikes.
wasn't true,
Oh my gosh.
that's true. So that's how that goes. But it was the choir director and the pastor having a torrid love affair and leaving out Mr. Nice Guy. That's what I want to know. Why do folks not like Mr. Nice Guy?
Does he get boring?
We're asking you.
Look at me.
Give us an answer. Give us an No, I know. It would just be, you wonder, like, what do they see? And maybe it's just, they don't intend for it to go as far as it did. But, and then you also have the truck driver guy, the one who, the trucking tycoon. He had a mistress. He basically flaunted her to his wife. And this is, they're Hispanic
Right.
family.
Right, Bill
and so
Hall.
very passionate, and and the wife is like chasing the mistress down, who's in her car, like on a highway. Old Bill comes along on a motorcycle, and he's chasing his two women folk
Oh,
down the
God.
road. Oh, it's amazing.
It is.
It's sad.
Yeah.
But anyway, so an accident occurs. Bill gets run off the road. They end up, I think, trying his wife for it, like wondering if she ran him off the road on purpose because he dies. And but this mistress, if you will, is all over social media flaunting their relationship. He's not doing anything to dampen it. Maybe he feels like he's in a position of power because he's the primary guy that brings home the bacon, but she's also a partner in this business, his wife, I mean. I'm just surprised. I feel like you kind of push people to the limit in that regard, that's not the manic slapping on a diaper, I got to hang on to this relationship.
Yeah.
This is almost like, I don't care.
Yeah.
I don't think my wife's either really going to leave me, or I don't
Right.
care if she does, or I'm just going to put my wants, needs, and desires over everything else. And maybe they're just blinded by whatever.
Right, whatever is right. Well, it's the intoxication, I think. 'Cause
Yeah.
I think what man wouldn't feel? His wife was beautiful too. She was a pretty Hispanic lady. His mistress was like Sofia Vergara, and
Yeah,
she
she
was
was
like.
pretty.
Talking nasty back and forth with the lady and wishing her a hysterectomy and all kind of crazy
Being
stuff back
ugly.
and yeah, being ugly. But this man standing over there go, isn't that cute? They both fighting over me.
Right.
And I imagine that feels intoxicating, or that testosterone takes a hit. I don't know, because it all just seems crazy as hell to me.
Some of them that seem like they're out to, kill somebody who's in their way of what they want. And then some of them it seems like the deaths are unintentional, if you will, that
Yeah.
nobody was expecting it to
Well,
go that far.
He was on his fancy Harley. He got a baby blue Harley, and she's in an Escalade, but the lover or mistress is driving in the $100,000 Range Rover toward her. So that's how all that twisted around, and he ends up rear-ending his
Yeah,
wife.
getting on that bike was a bad idea.
That's what I thought too. I was like, now come on, man.
Yeah.
You might have put yourself in that situation
Yeah.
on multiple levels.
Yeah, but it was so sad. But what they
Yeah.
said was that she got found guilty, and what they said was she was going away for a long time, but she had this wonderful lawyer that she sat up in there and she thought about it, and she said, no, 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 sudden passion is her defense, and she only got a couple of years.
And it is Texas. They're probably
Right.
like, we got you.
Yeah, because you were doing that. She got more time for the tax problem she created while she's in jail than she did for killing Mr. Bill Hall.
Wow. That's pretty crazy.
It is, but that's what happened.
And by the way, if you are watching live and you have any questions for any of us, please go ahead and leave comments, because I'm right here looking at Facebook and I can see your questions and comments if you have any. And if you don't, then please feel free to listen in. But yeah, and I know your expertise is in substance abuse, and that has come up in some of these cases that we cover too. And we were just talking about Phil Hartman. I know we're, for our younger viewers, you may not remember, but Phil Hartman was that for we young viewers. Yesteryear
know.
viewers.
I barely remember.
I know, me too, if I dig in the Wayback Files. But Phil Hartman, very funny, just a great comedian, great impersonator.
Lots of voices on The Simpsons.
Oh my gosh, I know. I didn't know that till I started digging into him. And then I was like, oh yeah, now I watch The Simpsons because my daughter loves it. And she's like, and I'm like, that's Phil Hartman. But Bryn was his wife. And I remember at the time, but I was busy going to college and whatever else or working. It was around that time. And I didn't pay that much attention. I was like, oh, how sad. I wonder what happened that his wife killed him. But as we dug into it, she was quite the heavy drinker. She was into some pills. And when she had the combination of both, it just brought out every worse characteristic that apparently she had. And that's what happened the night that she killed him, and even showed up at a friend's house after she shot him with her kids still sleeping upstairs, goes to a friend's house, and he's like, oh my God, I don't even believe, because she's saying, I killed my husband. I shot Phil. And he's like, I don't believe you, because she was so messed up. So he let her sleep it off for a little bit. Then she wakes up and she's still like, I've killed him. And that's when they go over there and find his body.
Yeah, I don't remember the details. I just remember she killed him.
But yeah, going to the substance abuse
Yeah,
part
sure,
of it.
sure. Again, I don't know the case. I don't
Yeah,
know the
and that's
woman
okay.
that well. But to generalize a little bit, I'm going to jump back to the kid stuff, though.
Yes.
Because I think the alcohol, we all know it loosens your inhibitions and all that. And we've all heard of like the angry drunk or the jolly drunk, or some people are fun loving and all that. And some people start to get an edge. And my take, this is just, Sean only represents Sean here, y'all, okay? But my take on it is that a lot of that is driven again by the old stuff, that their wants and needs, or lack of having gotten stuff as a kid. Those things are expressed later on. I really believe that, and I think that's some of what comes out when we're under the influence too.
I think you're right on that. I mean, of course you are. You're the expert.
Well, it's
But-
it's just things, an idea for over the course of a long time of working with folks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, he was an avoider. He would literally just go to sleep when she'd start spinning out of control, or he'd walk away. He would never, and almost never, confront her on anything. And she was jealous of his success. She was fine when they both were struggling actors, but when he took off, when he was like Pee Wee Herman's Playhouse, when he's writing for Pee Wee's
Oh,
Big
wow.
Show,
Oh, wow.
yeah, and The Simpsons and stuff. I mean, he was everywhere. He could do hundreds of voices. I mean,
Yeah.
I can't even remember hundreds of things, but he's doing hundreds of voices.
It was his gift.
Right, but we were talking about that, how, it would be frustrating. You're upset with somebody and they're like, peace out, Girl Scout, I'm going to bed. And that's how they dealt with it. So that's how she dealt with her anger and her, I guess, being jealous. And some of these people that do this seem like they always got to win at all cost. And are they winning? Like, she shot him, then she shot herself to leave her children motherless and fatherless.
Oh, I know. That does break my heart when the kids are left. And I go back to, Hillary Brown, a mother of 3 young children, and now they'll never see their mom again. And talking to her parents, they're, of course, devastated. They want to do everything they can to spend time with those kids. And her father described their relationship as toxic. And I think some of their coworkers would say the same. They were on social media. If they fought, it was on social media. Not married, married. you know, upset, you know, and it's just this drama. And it was a new relationship that they were in, sadly, as well. They'd both been in previous relationships. They both were divorced, and they got together. And I think, to your point, you know, when you find something new and it's all intoxicating and it's passionate, it seems like, well, this is never going to end. I'm going to have this feeling forever, and it's always going to be here. And this is the answer to all of my problems. And then, you know, reasonably or unreasonably, we bring all those expectations into this relationship or into any relationship. And if there's dysfunction involved, which we're all human, there's bound to be some kind of dysfunction, but to carry it to that level, you know, I don't think anybody goes into it. I would hope not. I mean, we have some cases like Corey Richens, who poisoned her husband with fentanyl, you know, and killed him. The first time, you remembered that, she poisoned him on Valentine's Day, and then that was unsuccessful. So she was like, gosh golly, let me try it again, you know, and was successful. That, to me, is calculated and just pure evil, in my opinion. You know, she hasn't been convicted of that. She hasn't been tried for it yet, but she's accused. But with Hillary Brown, I don't think she ever intended to die. I don't think that was,
not.
and I don't think Ben intended to kill her per se either. I mean, they were just in this spiral, according to the family, and she became, or she really enjoyed these procedures, and so she passed away from lidocaine toxicity, according to the autopsy.
Well, where was it going to go?
And by the way, Mr. Rich Archibald, thank you so much for your comments. He wanted to have any updates on Ben Brown, and the only update I can give you on that case is that they're still preparing for trial. Last time that his attorney was in court, Mark O'Mara, he basically told the court that he needed a little more time to prepare, and it is going to be an interesting trial because it's medically based, if you will. They're going to have to get into a lot of medical terms, you know. Basically, it's a medical death, if you, you know, and so we'll see what becomes of his trial, but that probably is not going to happen before spring or summer, would be my guess. But yeah, and you can follow Jessica Jones's page as well. She's, you know, got a lot of information about Ben Brown and gets into some, you know, aspects of it that we don't necessarily get into on Gulf Coast Confidential, but people are watching.
Right.
I will say that. That's
Oh, no
the bottom
doubt.
line.
Well, and also what we're going to see in the trial come out is because there was dysfunction everywhere they went, and it was behavior that was identifiable. But, you know, when somebody uses anger and rage and I'm the Messiah because I'm the surgeon, when they do that, they have everybody scurrying and back. Ben Brown exhibited so much dysfunction and behavior that he should have been called out for many, many times, especially practicing medicine.
Right, and these are all allegations that came from people
they're
who worked
allegations,
from him.
but they're people that were there. And so he never got put on a behavioral contract. You don't always have to be taking a drug. Some people's drug of choice is more, raising hell, I'm over you, I'm in charge. You know, a drug can be almost anything, you know. So he needed to be put on a behavioral contract by our Department of Health.
Well, and speaking of medications, that's another thing that came up in the Department of Health's report and investigation of that whole incident involving the death of his wife. As they said, according to staff, there was a medicine cabinet that had an array of pills, if you will, that were available to people to go in there. Was it Versed? I know I ask this every time. Versed or Versed?
Right. And some benzodiazepine.
And they would just take the edge off.
Right. It was like, I think I'll take this to self-medicate. He even had it to where Hillary had self-medicated herself, but he had let that happen. I will not blame Hillary for anything because he is the surgeon and he's in charge and he's the one that I'm pretty sure, you know, this is my allegation, because she was perfectly beautiful.
Oh, I know.
Without any
Agreed.
surgery. So darling. So, I mean, we keep seeing that. When somebody creates all this chaos and all this confusion, they feel good. That makes people feel powerful. They like that feeling because it makes everybody else scurry away.
Right. Well, and in Corey Richens' case, she felt powerful because she was like, I'm going to get what I want at the cost of my husband's life. And then allegedly turned around and wrote a book on how kids can deal with grief for her own son, and here she is supposedly responsible for creating the grief that they're experiencing. That, you know, and here I'm going to throw out one of those terms that I really know nothing about, Sean, but that seems like sociopathic behavior to me.
And that comes to my mind as well. So
You're
in
the
safe
expert.
territory there.
Okay.
Yeah.
What is actually the difference between a narcissist and a sociopath? And I think about that a lot because you hear both of those terms.
Well, sociopath really is not it's not a term that's further explained in kind of the primary manual that I'm familiar with in what which is what we use to diagnose mental illness. Sociopath isn't in that book.
Interesting. Okay.
What is are a group of 3 clusters of personality disorders. I believe there are 10 newer folks who have their finger on the thumb of the latest DSM. Don't call in, but
Right.
but I just because when I was coming up and then more practicing, I used the 4th edition and the 4th text revised edition of this book I'm talking about, and now there's who knows 5 or maybe 6. But anyway, narcissism is a personality disorder. What I suspect we're also wanting to compare that with or to is antisocial
That's right.
personality disorder.
Yes.
And so both are like, as I was kind of talking about earlier, they're maladaptive ways that folks have adapted to trying to get by. But narcissistic, or the narcissist is another one that's really thrown out a lot.
It is, yes. Probably unnecessarily so.
I probably so. When a lot of times it just sounds to me like we're talking about someone who's really self-centered.
I think so too. Yeah. It's just almost like pathological selfishness. I think about that even with your nephew.
Definitely. Yeah, and I had been to a counselor one time, and she was a renowned counselor around here, and basically I was talking and getting all lathered up. You know how I do. So so anyway, she said, well, Pam, 80% of the problems that we all experience is selfishness. And I got to thinking, well, I don't know if that figure's right, if it's high or low or whatever, but I do believe you,
Yeah, well, and speaking of selfish, going back to Corey Richens, who's accused of, poisoning her husband. I mean, of all poisons to use, fentanyl really kind of blew my mind. And for those folks who aren't familiar, I did a whole piece on it for the News Journal talking about fentanyl and the impact that it's taken on families, because a lot of the people who are dying from it on these overdoses, they don't mean to die from it. They're taking what they think is something that either is without fentanyl or maybe has a little bit of fentanyl, but it's, when it's homemade, if you will, there's it's not like it's being made in a lab and measured and, made appropriately. We know what you're getting. But can you tell us a little bit about exactly what is fentanyl and what makes it so deadly?
Well, I can try, but then I remembered Pam's a pharmacist, and I was like,
I'm here with you.
I'm a lean on Pam on this.
Yes.
Really, and I was thinking about this earlier. It's an opiate, it's a painkiller. It's a really strong painkiller that is just, 100 times or whatever stronger than something like morphine, and Pam, chime in, girl. But here's my excuse for him and hawing about it is professionally, I kind of, about 10 or 15 years ago, I started edging away a little bit from the strict substance use treatment stuff into what we call co-occurring or dual diagnosis stuff, and then leaning a little more into the mental health treatment stuff. And so when fentanyl started killing people, because I've had, personally, it's impacted me, but treatment-wise, professionally, I was away from that game, that specialty is what I was away from. And so I didn't have my finger on the pulse of it professionally. Again, family has been impacted by fentanyl, but personally for sure. And just as you describe, it's not intentional stuff. It's just, it's folks who've gotten into it and just take a little bit too much,
And it stops your heart. You just quit breathing, kind of a thing.
Or don't even know they do it. I told you one time I was on my way to work at the pharmacy, and I had come across a car in a ditch, and there was a girl laying on the car sideways like this with her arms out, and there was a man standing up on the street, and he was like a real strong man. He was looking around. He said, I don't know what to do. I stopped, and he said, well, I'm going to go down there. I was like, no, because obviously he's gotten out of the car. But like when people come out of that fentanyl, I didn't have any Narcan on me at that time. This was a moment that I learned that I'll always have Narcan on me. But he didn't know what to do. I said, don't go down there yet. But we had to call 911, and they came. And when she came out of that, thank goodness the Narcan brought her back around, to knock the opioids off of those receptors. And that's one thing about fentanyl I want people to learn is learn how to give Narcan. You can't mess up on it. It's not going to hurt them if they didn't have fentanyl. It's just something we all need to know. If people have anybody in their life that takes opioids, or it doesn't even have to be that, because you can be out at a club or something and get those Flintstone-looking things that you think's a Xanax, and then take that and it's dusted with fentanyl. Or picking up garbage in the parking lot. I used to pick up trash in the parking lot on the way in the pharmacy all the time. I don't do that anymore because things can have that on there. I'm not trying to be an alarmist or whatever, but I'm of the opinion that almost every single one of the overdoses are an accident.
Yes.
I don't know anybody that goes, hey, let me see if I can overdose and get everything going on here, unless they're of that mindset right then. But if we think about it like that, and if we stay non-judgmental, we don't need to be judging folks. This could happen to any of us. And the fact that if we turn things around and take a different look at it, like an educational look, we can save a lot of people from these overdoses. But somebody like Corey Richin that's doing this to her husband, and he even told people, if I die, she did it. There's a case right now of a serial killer lady. She's killed 4 men with fentanyl. The 5th one lived, thank goodness, but that trial's coming up in a couple of months, and I just was looking at that and go, how easy was that for her?
I do think kids play a role in why people decide to stay, because my mind immediately goes to, if I got to tell Sean, if I die, blame Pam, then I might, maybe I need to rethink my relationship with Pam.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, as opposed to saying, I just keep my fingers crossed,
Well, I was thinking that same thing when we were talking about the Phil Hartman case. That's probably why he settled with, I'm just going to turn in and go to bed, because they had a couple of kids, right? Yeah.
Yep. And they say that's right, because the only time he did confront her is when he said, you are a wonderful mother when you are not drunk. And he said, if you do this again, then I'm going to report you or take the kids. And that's all it took for her to do what she did.
Right, and I think the same thing with Bree Kuhn, but I don't know that they had kids together.
Yeah.
I think I said that earlier.
Some,
but did they have kids together?
They had 2 together, but Colin was such a wonderful dad to the 12-year-old also. I mean, there were no problems there as far as like him. If there were problems, it was on Bree. But Bree had to make sure that everybody knew she was the breadwinner and the platinum card holder.
So it was about the power.
Yeah, that was part of her dysfunction. And she just wanted to be topping him all the time.
Yeah, that's interesting. And we'll be wrapping this up here soon, but when I think about people wanting to top someone, then some of the other cases that come to mind, the imbalance of power relationships, if you will, are the ones with the significant age difference. And of course, Mary Letourneau comes to mind, Pam Smart comes to mind, the cases of the women seducing, if you will, the teenage boys,
right.
these children. I mean, that's a whole nother level of wackadoo. If you
It is.
Cougars. I don't think that's in the mental illness manual, but it needs to be.
It should be.
Wackadoo covers a lot.
Per Molly.
But I don't mean it like insulting, because I realize that people do really suffer from various mental illnesses, and I'm not trying to make light of it. But to me, I guess, being a woman, I can't imagine looking at a child and thinking, what a great idea this is. And you see the headlines all the time. Like, in fact, I just did a story, and it's just an accusation, but there is a teacher at a private Christian school in Niceville over in Okaloosa County. He's also wrote for a number of conservative publications and was all over social media hounding about drag queens grooming people's kids, for molestation. And then this guy gets busted for molestation. And not by, and the charge is like lewd and lascivious on a victim under 12. He's like 39, 40 years old. And according to the victim, he did this during Bible class at the school, goes up to his desk to ask a question like, hey, what about this? And like, he's sitting there, like you're sitting there, she's standing up, and then he answers the question, she goes to move away. And this is all according to the Niceville Police Department's report. He gives her a side hug and then lets his hand slide down to her buttocks and takes his thumb and is rubbing her butt. And 2 other students, according to this police report, see it. So they corroborate her statement. And then I guess he made a couple of other comments to her, according to this police report, that she also said made her feel uncomfortable. And one was something like, I really like that little flower beret you're wearing. That looks cute. And then kind of said something along the lines of, or maybe it does. So to me, that would imply like it's a fantasy in their own head. They've built this up to where this child is somehow reciprocating in their mind or behaving in flirtatious behavior, that isn't there. Now, with these 2 women that we mentioned earlier, Pam Smart and Mary Kay Letourneau, I think there was some reciprocation,
yeah.
but that's again that's that imbalance of power, you
Yeah.
know, too.
Yeah.
And I just go, and I'm sure the answer probably is like what you're talking about, somewhere in their childhood. This makes them feel safe. This makes them feel wanted. But to me, that's just a whole nother level of, like I said, wackadoodness.
Was there a question there?
I don't know. If you want to weigh in, please. I really don't have a question. I'm just like, tell me why it's weird, Sean. Yeah. I mean, I know
you're
why it's
talking
weird.
about the predation.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you know, my first thought is always let's look at their history and how did they come
And maybe
up?
that could have happened to
Maybe
them.
they were abused, but maybe not. It could also go into the realm of the sociopathy of the maladaptive way of, you know, just thinking you need to get by based on childhood stuff. You know, we all learn and are impacted in our childhood. It's just a matter of fact. It's just you know, we're first realizing what the heck's going on, and are influenced highly, and the genetics play a large piece as well, especially when all this stuff is impacted, even the sociopathy to some extent, it seems, but certainly the addiction and the mental illness. You know, I always, like I said earlier, that's where I want to explore first is family history, you know.
Probably a good place to start. Well, with Mary Kay Letourneau, she's looking at a little boy in the 2nd grade. So there's a lot, you know, that's when she did
Good
fall
Lord.
for Billy, you know, and then kept him tied up all the way through his life, ends up having children with him, gets, you know, all kind of things happening in the court system to where she was charged with rape of him. And, you know, even though there are some things that are clues that say, okay, this is happening here, there, and everywhere, the bottom line is wrong and right is right. And we have to call people out, like the Christian school folk down there, because I also know from experience, like with my ex-brother-in-law, you know, him with that Pensacola High School, inappropriate, they say, relationship with a child. That is not a relationship. It's inappropriate, all right, but we have to call things out and be able to follow it up too, because Pam Smart, she got a 16-year-old, you know, I don't know what that was about. As a grown woman, you're looking at a 2nd grader with Mary Kay Letourneau, then you're looking at a 16-year-old. It's like you said, you are not fully developed mentally, apparently. So we have to watch. But who are we to stand over here? I get so upset when we have the bystander effect and go, well, that sure is some messed up stuff they're doing over there. It is wrong. Tell somebody, you know,
Right.
stop it.
Absolutely. Well, I think we're pretty much coming to the end of this, but are there any final cases that you want to mention or anything else that you think would be good to talk about with Effed Up Love?
Well, you know me, I'm always looking at that Steve Nodine case over
Yes.
there with Angel.
Oh, that
and
was
stuff.
another sad
Yeah,
one.
that was very sad because, you know, here we are, a lady, she's the beach Barbie over there, and he decides he's just going to be married and try to have her in a romance and have his child over at her house and all this stuff that's like as the world turns.
It's very tribal
Yeah,
almost. Like I got camps
is.
everywhere.
Yeah. Oh, it's like, and here's the thing. Why would anybody stop doing what they're doing if it's working for them and they're getting all their needs
All the
met?
bennies.
Right. So, I mean, when we let folks do that, I mean, you're not coming to my house and being married and bringing someone over to have a bedroom at my house. You're not doing that.
Right.
Now, obviously, some folks do that. But then this is how this dysfunction seems to start. Maybe I'm a hardtail, but I mean, when we see something wrong, run. That's my advice.
Yes, I agree.
Everybody's got different filters, though.
Yeah.
Everybody's got filters. You see stuff. Other people are like, honey, come here.
They look crazy. Let's get it on. Right. It's true, though. But yeah, and there's no way. I mean, certainly not in one live podcast version or any of our multiple recorded versions are we going to be able to prevent someone probably from jumping off a cliff if that's really what they want to do, you know, so to speak, in a relationship. But yeah, I think it's the ones that don't see it coming that my heart goes out to, where they feel trapped.
It's sad. Yeah, well, love is such a wonderful thing. You know, it's just so wonderful. You know, we've got this effed up love, but we've got the twin sister of lovely love.
Yep, that's right. Well,
When's that podcast?
That'll be the next round too.
right.
We're going to go live here in about 30 minutes on the other one. Awesome. Well, Sean, thank you so much for
Sure. Thank you
joining
for having
us.
me.
Yeah. And Pam, thank you as always. And we appreciate you joining us for this deep dive conversation on Gulf Coast Confidential. I'm your host, writer, and producer Molly Barros, with co-host and researcher Pam Hill. Of course, our guest Sean Abbott. And we're going to keep doing these deep dives, and we hope you will listen in next time. And if you've not caught our podcast, Gulf Coast Confidential Conversations, you can listen wherever you get your favorite podcast, and you can also watch it on YouTube. And if you do, just don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Have a great night, y'all, and happy Valentine's Day tomorrow.